Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have a really cool guest. He's an accomplished author and speaker. Richard Gerver's on with me, and we're going to talk about change and how change brings a lot of fear and like really naming like fear of what, right? So we're gonna talk about that and kind of I started thinking about sometimes change brings almost a grieving process for some folks. And so, we're just going to talk about like what are the dynamics around change and why are your people resisting change at your schools and what's actually going on with people, especially with people that are different than us, right? So, before we jump into this topic, I wanted to welcome you to the show, Richard. I'm so excited that you're here.
Oh, Becca, it's such a pleasure to be with you. Really looking forward to this conversation. Really am.
So Richard's coming from us from the UK, as you can hear in his accent. This is it's fun for me as well. And so, you and I were talking briefly about there's a lot of similarities between the UK school system and the
Mm.
US school system, and you've done quite a bit of work in the US as well, right? And so, yeah, like this is going to be an awesome conversation. So I'd love you just to briefly share with everyone what is it that you do in the world right now.
Oh, Becca, I think the short answer is I'm a former school principal with a big mouth, is probably the best way to describe me. So I've had two careers. I was a school principal and teacher in elementary education for nearly 20 years, then by accident rather than design. 18 years ago, I transitioned, if you like, into a world. One led into the other. It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds, where my I was able to explore my bigger passion, exploring human leadership, change, simplicity, all based, and I suppose this is the core of what we might talk about today. Like you, like all the people listening, like so many of our educators, we live in this world, as you said, where change is really scary for a lot of people. And I look back on my career and think, you know what? You and I, educators, we've all worked with the world's leading experts in change. The problem is they're all under five. And so most of my career, in short, has been trying to understand how we reverse engineer what it is we seem to do to people that takes us from being absolutely driven by change in every element of our lives to becoming totally resistant to it.
Yes, I have never thought about it that way, right? That like its children are like, yeah, sure, let's do this. Yeah, we're pretending to be farmers and now we're going, to the moon. And it's like, whoa, what, and they're leading experts in change. That's fascinating to think about. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And I just want to share with everyone. I don't say this often enough in this on this podcast, but what we do in schools that we don't name is we are doing change management in schools every year. We are not most often not trained in it. We are not calling it, and that is exactly what we're doing. There are actual change management frameworks and theories and thoughts about it that we often don't have any experience in, and yet we are expected to implement change, right, without kind of understanding what's happening here. And so naming like, hey, what we're doing is change management in schools, I think is really important because when you start to look at it through a certain lens, things start to make sense. Right. So I would love to hear from you. Like, what would you call what we're doing in schools? That's my language.
I think it's really, I mean, listen, I'm going to strip it back to what I think is at the core of this. And I think we overcomplicate so much. I mean, it's part of the symptom of our crisis around change anyway. But when you strip it back, to me, given the lives most of us have led, most of your listeners have led, if I said to you that actually, if you think about it, the ability to change is exactly the same as the ability to learn. Learning and change are the same thing. So, one of the things that has always fascinated me is if we have a capacity to learn, if we find things of interest, if we put our heads up, we're curious, we go, oh, okay, so what's the potential? What's the opportunity? What could I do if I did it differently? Learning is about experimentation, it's about hypothesizing, it's about picking up where we make mistakes and going, okay, well, how do I alter the parameters and do it differently? So for me, let's take it back to that educational verdict that actually change and learning are the same thing. So as educators, You go into your schools and colleges every single day and create the perfect climate for change for your students. Yet we don't parallel that in terms of what we do and how we think of change. And I think if we started to look at those parallels and deconstruct what it is that makes great learning, and start to apply those principles ourselves, we can start to think very differently about change. I think in essence, and I'll shut up in a minute, I promise, Becca. In essence, I think the really scary thing for us as adults is that sense of control. When we hear change, what we actually hear is a loss of control. I am losing control. Yet the difference between us as adults and as children in a learning environment is children expect not to have control.
Mm.
They are the learners, right? We are the people delivering the learning. And as adults, that idea of us losing the control is often, at essence, what I think prevents us, A, from being capable of seeing change as something positive and constructive, and secondly, as something we try to avoid because it feels bad to us. So I think, yeah, in essence, for me, change and learning are almost intrinsically linked.
I love that. That's a really great way. I've never thought about it that way, but that's exactly it. And I've never thought about like children, part of their willingness to change is they don't expect to have control, right? And I think though, right? Then I think about the distinction between pedagogy and andragogy, right? Andragogy is adult learning, study of adult learning. And there's major overlap around those, but there is some distinctions, and one of them is adults come to learning with a lot of background knowledge, right? And it makes me think about, we have teachers in schools a lot of times, the ones that when I'm working with school leaders, the ones that are like our most resistant teachers are our veteran teachers, right? And I'm like, oh, that actually makes perfect sense, right?
Mm.
These teachers have been around for so many years, decades, some of them, and have been successful teaching in various models. And then someone, not them, has chosen a change and has informed them, I would like you to comply with this change. And they're like, whoa, 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 right? And there's this fear of loss, fear of control, losing control, fear of losing competence, right? Like not being competent in what is happening, fear of safety. Um, and I think about, children are kind of like, oh, well, we just learn. This is our learning environment, right? And for adults, there's the willingness to learn, and I think there's this other capacity around why.
Mm.
Like, I didn't choose this change, right?
Mm.
Why? It's like, oh, I'm totally willing to learn new things, but why this thing?
I think, and again, that speaks to me about the challenge of leadership. Because if what we do is we put change onto people, that
Yes.
just crystallizes that sense of disenfranchisement, right? A
Hmm.
lack of empowerment.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, what we've got to do is spark in adults the same thing great pedagogy does when we
Hmm.
spark in children, which
Hmm.
is you have to ignite their curiosity. And
Yeah.
if what we do, children are complex consumers, and we all know to our cost is that if, as an educator, you walk into a classroom and you say, right, children, shut up, sit down, listen to me. I'm going to put up on the board what we're going to learn. I'm going to dictate it to you. And all you got to do is memorize it. You're going to
Hmm.
lose those kids, most of them within seconds, right?
Hmm.
As you would adults.
Yeah.
And all of that is because you are not crystallizing and sparking their curiosity. You're
Hmm.
not starting with a question, not engaging them and involving them in the journey.
Hmm.
And change at an adult level is exactly the same. I would contest that people aren't anti change. They're anti change that is, you made the distinction, being done to them.
Hmm.
If what
Yes.
you do is you start by crystallizing a question, you get people to think about something to help solve a problem, a challenge, then they're invested. And if they're invested, they feel like they're active participants. And if they're active participants, they are far more likely to engage. And the other thing you said, which I think is really interesting and true, is often it is our vets, our most experienced teachers, right? And by the way, we have to, I think one of the things, just as an aside, I think um, we have to really celebrate our vets and experienced teachers. I
Yes.
think we live not just in education, but societally in a world where we do not respect lived wisdom enough. There's a wonderful saying which really chimed with me when I was an educator, but I've used it since, and it's this. Um, and it's not about dying, it's about leaving the profession. But every time an old African proverb, every time an old person dies, a library burns down. We need to
Oh.
protect that library, right? Because what we also mustn't do is make people feel that all that lack of that lived wisdom, all of that experience is now no longer valuable because we're going to do something new and do
Mhm.
something different. And that's why, again, if you crystallize curiosity, if you get people to become participants in the dialogue that actually constructs that change, you are valuing their wisdom and their knowledge and their expertise, and they then automatically feel more engaged in the process. And I know as education leaders, right, we are under so much pressure and so much scrutiny, and we think we have got to implement that yesterday. And that's the problem. We make the mistake of going, okay, I'm paid more money, so I've got to solve the problem. I'll work out the plan, I'll put the strategy in place, then I'll push it down onto people. I have a saying which I hope catalyzes some thought, maybe a bit provocative. And it's one I've used for many years, and it's this: systems and structures change nothing, people do. And I think as senior leaders in education, we need to be really minded of that.
Mhm. Yes. Yes, yes to so many things. Um, oh, you made me think of so many things. The veteran, I'm just going to share kind of a random story that it made me think of. My family's full of teachers. I came from a long line of teacher people, and like one was a librarian, like very caring professions, right? So one of my aunts was a teacher and has been long retired. And she continues to be like a reading interventionist at a school, like part time. She's like, I retired, but I can't stop working, and she loves it. And she recently, I made us a Google Doc and she is like someone that literally helped. She's formative in my own teaching career, right? And I recently made us a Google Doc with information we both needed. And I was like, oh, I'll just shoot it over to you. And I was like, do you want me to send it the link or like a downloaded document? She goes, oh no, no, not a link. Like if you I could see all of that world of like, I don't understand Google Docs. Send me the Word version, right? And it just the world of veteran teacher hit me. She's a phenomenal teacher. She makes such a difference in the world of children and still does. And she's turning 80. And she was like, duh, that Google Doc thing. And I think it just relates to what you said, right? She is making such a difference in the world of education with children. And yet, this newfangled technology thing that a lot of us have moved towards and embraced, it really is scary for her. And it just kind of hit me like, wow, right? We have these treasured veteran teachers at our school that have been so impactful for children, and we're not turning around saying, hey, what do you think about this, or do you need to go a little slower? I think we get caught up in our shoulds. Well, they should know, or they should watch the video, and not acknowledge there's some anxiety that comes with big change, especially around technology. um, and we're taking people that are used to being very successful, and suddenly it's like you're going to do this with one arm tied behind your back. You're going to get this smart board. Like we're going to take away your whiteboard and give you a smart board, like go teach now. And that can feel like a threat to your competence, a threat to like, I was really good at this, and now this is really hard, and I don't understand why I need to learn this and why I need to take the time to change while navigating this emotional cost of learning this new thing.
And I think you're right. And I think we have to be very careful. I mean, it's a great example, kind of an interactive board, a
Mhm.
projector.
Yeah.
Such a great example. Because when you think about it, when they really started to come into education, which has got to be 25 years ago, I
Yeah.
reckon now, what was really interesting is this incredible catalyst for conversation about professional development
Yeah.
was there for us.
Yeah.
But we implemented it appallingly badly. Because what
Yes.
we did was we ripped out the chalkboards, put one of these in classrooms, and then what happened was even adoptive teachers just went, oh, so I'm going to use this exactly the same way that I
Yeah.
used my chalkboard then. And, now what we're seeing. So, for example, you push that forward now and you think about AI and you think about what may come next, generative AI, and the absolute panic in education around artificial intelligence, chat GPT, and all of this kind of stuff, right? And actually, the problem is we feel threatened by it because it might actually make it harder for us to do what we've always done in the way we've always done it. We shouldn't be looking at it that way. We should be going, okay, this is really interesting stuff. Let's have a conversation now, catalyzed by AI and what it's doing and how
Yeah.
our students are using it. Let's use that as a catalyst for a conversation about how do we use this to support the next iteration of what education may look like. When you think about it, and I started teaching at the start of the 1990s. And anyone who's watching this clip on video will be thinking, Richard, that's impossible. And that's very kind of you to say so. But the point is, when you think about how many new things have come into the sphere of education, many of which have been throughout society, not exclusive to education, but have come into the sphere and orbit of education, and you actually genuinely ask the question, have we used any of those things to truly catalyze meaningful transformation in the system? I'm going to be provocative again here and say we haven't. Because pretty much, despite all of this innovation, all of this extraordinary set of riches that society has bestowed on us, right? We continue to do pretty much the same thing in the same way, timetable the same. Subjects are hierarchically in the same order. Classrooms are pretty much set up the same way, although maybe we now use tablets instead of exercise books and textbooks. We use interactive boards in the way we use chalkboards, right? Actually, very much most of what we do in a classroom is almost the same. And so one of the things we've got to do within the education context is realize that when we talk about change, it is an exciting opportunity to be a catalyst for transformation. The problem is, in so many of our lived experiences, and this talks back to the fear and exhaustion so many of our colleagues feel, what it feels like most of the time is, so you're just going to make me do what I've always done and try and do it more efficiently. That is not change. That is just a Taylorist model of very old-fashioned industrial thinking. And it's why I think we're seeing so much burnout in younger teachers, why we're seeing so many older teachers and vets panic and feel, right, that's it, I'm done, I can't cope with another iteration of this. And actually what we've got to do is start seeing the new advances, the new opportunities as catalysts for conversations to begin new journeys around change and learning, not as threats, not as, well, if you can't do that, you're showing us to be incompetent, you must be incompetent. Again, sorry to harp on about this really, Becca, but when you think about young children, one of the reasons young children are so good at learning and change is because nobody's taught them that if they get something wrong, it's bad, that it shows them as incompetent or lacking as a professional or not caring or not working hard enough. All the things as adults we start to perceive when people say to us, you need to change, we need to change. What children see, because no one's told them it's bad yet, is this is brilliant. Let's try, let's play, let's explore, let's investigate. And if it goes wrong, usually the adult interaction around me is people laugh, encourage me, say, what have we learnt? Let's try again. The wooden block tower is the perfect example. Nobody turns around to a 2-year-old child once they build a block tower and it falls over and goes, well, that was bad, wasn't it? Don't do that again. What we do is laugh and go, oh, let's see if we can build a bigger base and make a taller tower, right?
Yeah.
And actually, we've got to start reframing the the way we experience this stuff and stop feeling like we're being reactive all the time and start to be more proactive. And that comes from being more um, curious
Mhm.
about the catalysts we're experiencing.
And you read my mind around being proactive versus reactive because, and you write in your book Change, and I'm going to show it for those watching the
Thank you.
YouTube of this. um, you talk about the busyness trap, and we at the end of the day, like we leaders are busy. Leaders need to get things done, and sometimes they need to be done yesterday. And I got it, right? Like there's an urgency to the change and transformation we're looking to make in our schools. And one of the things I say in my workshops a lot is it takes time, either
Mhm.
proactively, taking the time to go through having the your staff become curious about the change, really navigating. I love that you've been using the catalyst, because those that have been listening, we have a catalyst mindsets, right? Navigating how to help teachers see the value in the change, believe they can be successful, or it will take time at the back end, reactively solving the same problems over and over and over again. It will take time, either at the front end or the back end, proactively or reactively. So I love that you said that, and for us not to get stuck in the busyness trap.
Absolutely. And believing that, and this is a real challenge for leaders, particularly in the current climate in education, is actually believing that taking time to take a breath, to sit back, to just smell the coffee, to take some time for yourself to process what's happening around you, that we think somehow that is something I shouldn't be doing. We
Yep.
feel guilty
Yep.
about doing that. And actually, we need to do that all of the time. I said to you before we came on air, Becca, that my wife she's just about to retire. She's been a school principal for 19 years. She is an extraordinary professional. And one of the things she has, because a lot of her colleagues, I think she's one of the longest serving school principals in our district, in our area, as a school principal. And a lot of her colleagues who are younger have said, what is your trick? What is your secret, right? How have you not just survived, but managed to thrive for 19 years, you know? And she said, because at least once a week I would go out for a coffee with a friend during school hours, another school principal or somebody else who worked in education, and we would just sit there and chew the fat. We would
Yep.
just talk about stuff we were juggling with. And she said, did I feel guilty about taking a couple of hours of my week out to just go and sit in a coffee shop and chew the fat with somebody about the issues we were dealing with? Hell no, because I would go back into school clearer, sharper, more energized, and much more able to see things objectively.
Mhm.
And again, before I became a school principal, I took some time out of school to work at a strategic leadership level. And people often used to say to me, how did you manage when you became a school principal to see the world differently? And I said, because for a couple of years, I'd taken a helicopter and looked at it from a plan view. And
Mhm.
the problem for so many of us is we're so passionate. We care so much. We feel so guilty about constantly proving our worth and our value that we end up being we drown
Mhm.
inside our own context. I hope you know, let me tell you this story very quickly. A few years ago, I got to interview an extraordinary American scientist, Barry Barish, who won the 2017 Nobel Prize for Physics. And I asked him what his greatest challenge was when he was putting together the team of researchers that went on to win a Nobel Prize. And he said to me, Richard, three dimensionality. There were thousands of scientists out there who were immaculately qualified, who had at least two doctorates to their name that could have been part of our research team. He said, the problem is if you put people in a room who have all done the same thing in the same field, and in research science, you become increasingly narrow the more successful you become, right? You end up breathing stale air, no matter how good you are, no matter how much you care. What he said next fascinated me. He said, I wanted three-dimensional people. I wanted people whose CVs told me stuff I didn't know. I wanted people that had a passion for travel or the arts or sports or something away from our job. He said, because ultimately what I needed to do was build a team of people who had the courage to challenge the beauty of the proof. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that poetic? And I would suggest that as leaders in education, we owe it to ourselves and our colleagues and our communities to find space and time to make sure that we and our colleagues find the courage to challenge the beauty of the proof.
I love that. And to embrace that challenge and not label it as resistance.
Yeah, exactly right.
I love that. Okay, we unfortunately we have to wrap up. I'd love you to share what's one thing that school leaders and coaches listening to this episode, what's one thing they could do tomorrow to help their educators and their school navigate change in a bit of a healthier way?
Gosh, I think the first thing is to, it goes back to what I've just said in a way. Um, Go book a coffee, actually not with another educator, with a leader in a different walk of life. Go just, and you must have, most of us have got networks we never use professionally, but they're there in our personal lives, right? Go book a coffee with somebody that works in a leadership position that you've known and trusted for a while.
Mhm.
Go meet them, don't have any agenda. Just ask them what they're juggling with. Because one of the problems we face as education leaders is we think most of what we're dealing with is unique. And the truth is, it's generic. And actually, the more we get out, the more we share, the more we discuss, the more we challenge each other's thinking by sharing each other's experiences, the more broad you will feel and the less claustrophobic about the challenge of your own leadership you'll feel on a daily basis.
Mhm. I love it. That's really great advice. Well, I love that you came on the show and shared all of this like brilliant like antidotes, right? And it's amazing. So, I'd love you to share with everyone where can they find out more about you and your work?
Well, there's my website, which is simply Richard Gerver, Gerver.com. They can find me there. And if they connect with me on LinkedIn or on socials, if they have a question, they just want to connect, I promise you I will respond to you personally. So I love hearing from people, learning from people. So please, please, please get in touch.